Mated to the Lycan King 4. The journey back to the Lycan Kingdom was anything but uneventful. The night after discovering her twin, Raven sat beside the campfire, her fingers idly tracing the mark Lucian had left on her neck. The embers crackled softly, sending a warm glow over the group. Kieran sat across from her, his expression thoughtful, while Thalos observed them both with knowing eyes. Lucian sat close to Raven, always within reach, his wolf satisfied, but still fiercely protective. "We should try it again," Thalos said suddenly, breaking the silence. His gaze flickered between Raven and Kieran. "Your magic, now that you've found each other, it should be stronger." Raven exchanged a glance with Kieran. The last time they had tested their connection, they had barely scratched the surface. Still, something about the idea intrigued her. Kieran nodded. "Fine, but carefully this time." Thalos gestured for them to extend their hands toward each other. The moment their fingers nearly touched, a pulse of energy sparked between them, rippling outward like an invisible force. The campfire flared suddenly, the flames reaching higher than before, their color shifting to a deep, mesmerizing blue. Lucian's eyes darkened, his instincts flaring, but he remained still, watching with wary curiosity. "Elemental control," Thalos murmured in fascination. "This is only the beginning." Raven felt the warmth of the energy flowing through her veins as if the elements themselves responded to her. She glanced at Kieran, who was equally stunned. "I can feel it," she whispered. Their moment of discovery was interrupted when Ella gasped, her hands clutching at her chest. What is that?" she stammered, her face pale, as she turned to look at Kieran. Kieran frowned. "Ella." Ella took a shaky step back, her breath coming in uneven gasps. "Why does your scent smell so different?" Kieran's eyes widened slightly before realization struck. His scent. He had unknowingly suppressed it for years, blending in to avoid unnecessary attention. But with their magic flaring to life, everything was shifting, including his mate bond. "No," Ella whispered, shaking her head. "No, this isn't right." Kieran tensed, his jaw clenching. "Ella." She turned away, her arms crossing over her chest as if to protect herself. "I can't. This wasn't supposed to happen." Lucian and Raven exchanged a look, both understanding how difficult this realization must be for Ella. "You don't have to accept it now," Kieran said, his voice softer. "But it won't change the truth." Ella's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and she nodded, but she didn't say another word. Her heart pounded as emotions clashed within her. Relief, fear, and an undeniable pull she wasn't ready to accept. How could fate be so cruel, tying her to someone when she had fought so hard to stand on her own? She clenched her fists, swallowing the lump in her throat. No matter how much she tried to deny it, she knew deep down that her life would never be the same again. The first night back at the palace, Raven and Lucian finally had the privacy they had been denied during their journey. As soon as they entered their chambers, the tension between them ignited into something deeper. Lucian lifted Raven effortlessly, pressing her against him as his lips captured hers in a slow, lingering kiss. "I've been waiting for this," he murmured against her skin, his hands roaming her body with reverence. Raven shivered under his touch, tilting her head as he traced his lips along the mark he had given her. "No more waiting," she whispered. That night they made love with a passion that had been building for weeks, their bond deepening in ways beyond words. Lucian worshipped every inch of her, savoring the way she responded to him. When they finally collapsed into each other's arms, their wolves intertwined just as deeply as their souls. The next morning, Raven met Ella in the gardens, the crisp air carrying the scent of blooming flowers and the fresh earth. Ella looked conflicted, her emotions warring beneath the surface. "I don't know what to do about Kieran," Ella admitted, kicking at a stone on the pathway. "The bond is there, but I feel like if I give into it, I'll lose control of everything I've built for myself." Raven took her hand. "I understand, Ella. I felt the same way at first. When I realized Lucian was my mate, I tried to run from it. I told myself I wasn't ready, that I wasn't worthy of him. But you were the one who told me to give him a chance and that the bond between fated mates is undeniable. And you were right. I fell in love with him beyond the bond. Ella's gaze softened as Raven squeezed her hand gently. Don't think of it as surrendering. Just spend time with him. Get to know him as a person first, not just as your mate. Ella sighed but nodded. Maybe you're right. That day, Ella invited Kieran to see all the work she and Raven had done to improve the pack. They walked through the marketplace where new shops flourished, the orphanage that was now thriving, and the training grounds where warriors prepared for the kingdom's protection. Kieran observed it all with quiet admiration, finally beginning to understand why his sister was so close to Ella. Life in the Lycan kingdom was thriving. The once forgotten corners of the packlands had been rebuilt, and prosperity had returned. The people had grown to love and respect Raven, their once skeptical whispers turning into more loyal devotion. Lucian had noticed the change as well. He saw the way the pack watched Raven with admiration, how warriors lowered their heads in respect, how children ran to her without hesitation. She had not only earned their love, she had become their heart. That evening, Lucian pulled Raven close as they stood on their balcony, looking over the bustling kingdom. They adore you, he murmured, brushing his lips against her temple. Raven leaned into him, her heart swelling with love. Because they see what you've always seen in me. Lucian turned her toward him, his eyes filled with something deeper than desire, something eternal. Then let me show you again. With that, he lifted her into his arms, carrying her inside as the night settled around them, sealing their love once more. As soon as the door shut behind them, Lucian pressed Raven against the wall, his breath hot against her skin. I've waited too long for this, he murmured, his voice thick with longing. Raven's fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer as she whispered, Then don't wait any longer. Lucian carried her to the bed, his touch reverent yet desperate, as if memorizing every inch of her. They moved in perfect harmony, their bodies attuned to one another in ways words could never capture. Every kiss, every caress, spoke of weeks of restraint finally breaking. Raven gasped as his lips trailed down her body, his touch worshipping her, as though she was the very air he breathed. As they gave in to their passion, their wolves howled in unison, strengthening their bond even further. The night stretched endlessly, filled with whispered promises and shared breath, until exhaustion finally claimed them, tangled in each other's embrace. Lucian held her close, pressing a lingering kiss to her forehead. You are mine, and I am yours. Always. Raven smiled against his chest, her fingers tracing his mark on her skin. Always. She sighed, shifting closer. Lucian noticed her drifting into thought, his fingers brushing along her spine. What's on your mind? He asked, his voice low and soothing. Raven hesitated before answering. Everything. The kingdom, my brother. The powers were just beginning to understand. I never expected any of this. Lucian's grip tightened around her waist, his warmth grounding her. You were meant for this, Raven. Just as you were meant to be mine. No matter what comes, we will face it together. His words sent a warmth through her, and she turned to face him, pressing a soft kiss to his jaw. Together, she echoed. The next morning, Lucian was working in his office. He exhaled as he recognized the scent beyond the threshold. Darius with serious news. We have a problem, Darius stated, his voice low. Alpha Gregor is gathering more allies. He's not just planning a battle, he's forming a coalition. And it's not just rogue sympathizers. Some of the Southern Alphas are siding with him. If we don't act fast, we could be looking at a full-scale war. Lucian's expression darkened. Damn it, I was hoping he would fall back after his initial failure. Darius shook his head. He's too proud for that. Losing the first battle only made him more determined. And with Celine whispering in his ear, it's getting worse. They want to tear Raven down before she's fully settled into power. Lucian's fists clenched at the mention of Celine. We keep this quiet for now. No need to cause panic within the pack. We prepare in silence. Increase training, keep our defenses on high alert, and start reaching out to our loyal allies. Gregor thinks he has the upper hand, but he underestimates us. Darius nodded. I'll make the preparations. Lucian knew he had to tell Raven the bad news first before gathering the council and elders. He found her at the orphanage, kneeling beside a small child who clung to her hand. The sight of her, so gentle, so caring, made his heart ache at what he was about to say. She sensed his presence before she turned, her expression shifting from warmth to concern, the moment she saw the tension in his posture. Lucian, what's wrong? He exhaled, stepping closer. We need to talk. Raven gave the child a reassuring smile before rising to her feet. She dusted off her dress and led Lucian outside, where the sounds of playing children faded into the background. Tell me. Lucian ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tightening. Alpha Gregor isn't backing down. Darius has confirmed that he's rallied more allies, including several southern alphas. They're preparing for war. Raven stiffened, her fingers clenching at her sides. He won't stop, will he? Even after losing the last battle. Lucian shook his head. His pride won't let him, and with Celine at his side, feeding his resentment, he's becoming more dangerous. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Then we don't wait for him to strike first. We prepare. We protect our people. Lucian's gaze softened, filled with both admiration and the weight of responsibility. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. We'll handle this together. Later that evening, Lucian gathered the council and elders in the grand hall. The tension was thick as he addressed them. Alpha Gregor has gathered an alliance of traitorous southern alphas and rogue factions. This is not just a skirmish. This is an attempt to overthrow our kingdom. Murmurs of unease filled the room, but Lucian raised a hand to silence them. Let me be clear. Our pack is strong, and we will not falter. We will train, we will fortify, and when the time comes, we will strike back with unwavering force. One elder, a grizzled warrior, frowned. And what of the alphas who betrayed their oaths? Lucian's voice was cold, decisive. When we win, they will be stripped of their titles. Their power will be broken, and their lands will belong to Kieran to restore the lost Lycan kingdom. Treason will not be tolerated. A silent agreement settled among the elders. They knew their king would not allow weakness within his reign. With the meeting adjourned, Lucian returned to Raven, finding her staring out at the moonlit kingdom. He wrapped his arms around her, pressing a kiss to her temple. It has begun, but we will finish it. Raven leaned into him, her determination matching his. Together. Meanwhile, after the council meeting, Ella and Kieran walked through the palace gardens, the cool night air carrying the faint scent of blooming jasmine. The gardens, once a neglected space of overgrown vines and forgotten pathways, had yet to receive the same attention as the rest of the kingdom. While Raven and Ella had focused on restoring the packlands, the palace grounds had remained untouched, a silent reminder of past turmoil. Ella sighed as she traced her fingers along the petals of a rose, her expression troubled. Everything's changing so fast. The war, the kingdom, even us. I don't know how to process it all. Kieran watched her closely, his gaze steady and unwavering. You're not alone in this, Ella. I know the bond isn't easy to accept, but I meant it when I said I'd wait for you. She turned to face him, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. It's not about you, Kieran. It's about me. I've spent my whole life fighting for control, for a place where I didn't have to rely on anyone. And now, suddenly, fate has handed me you, and it terrifies me. Kieran stepped closer, his presence warm and grounding. Then let's take it one step at a time. No expectations, no pressure. Just us. Ella hesitated, but as she met his gaze, something inside her softened. Slowly, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his. Kieran exhaled, his hand closing over hers, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. A quiet moment passed before Kieran gently lifted her chin, his thumb brushing along her jaw. "May I?" Ella swallowed, her heart pounding. But instead of answering, she leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a soft, lingering kiss, neither rushed nor demanding, just the simple acknowledgement of something inevitable. When they pulled apart, Kieran's lips curled into a small smile. "See? One step at a time." Ella let out a breathless laugh, her fingers still intertwined with his. One step at a time. For so long, she had fought against the idea of fate, against the bond she never asked for. She had spent years building her own identity, proving she didn't need anyone to define her. And yet here she was, standing with Kieran, feeling something she never thought she would. Peace. Maybe trusting him didn't mean losing herself. Maybe it meant finally allowing herself to be whole. The next few days, Ella found herself both drawn to Kieran and overwhelmed by the intensity of the bond. He remained patient, giving her space, but his teasing smirk never faded. One evening, as they stood by the training grounds, Kieran leaned against a post, watching her spar with some of the warriors. "You keep avoiding me, little mate," he said, crossing his arms. Ella wiped sweat from her brow and shot him a glare. "I do not—" Kieran chuckled, stepping closer. "Then why do you tense up every time I get near you?" Ella huffed, then suddenly stood on her toes and pressed a quick, unexpected kiss to his lips before stepping back. "There. Now stop smirking at me." Kieran blinked, momentarily stunned, before a slow grin spread across his face. "Oh, Ella, you just started something dangerous." She turned and walked away, hiding the warmth spreading across her cheeks, while Kieran laughed behind her. Raven and Kieran trained tirelessly, unlocking more of their elemental powers with Thalos guiding them. Meanwhile, the entire pack was preparing far outside the borders, ensuring that the kingdom and pack lands would remain unharmed. The elders, children, and those not fit for battle were relocated to fortified areas, hidden deep within protected territories, ensuring their safety. Warriors trained relentlessly, reinforcing their strategies and defenses, while scouts monitored enemy movements closely. Supplies were stockpiled, and defensive barriers were strengthened around the key strongholds. The Lycan kingdom was ready. But Raven knew that this battle wasn't just about strength. It was about proving herself, solidifying her place as queen, and ensuring that no one could ever question her rule again. On the day of battle, Raven and Kieran stood side by side, their auras glowing with untapped power. The weight of their lineage and destiny pressed heavily upon them. Raven clenched her fists, her pulse quickening as doubt whispered at the edges of her mind. What if they weren't ready? What if their power wasn't enough? Kieran sensed her unease and gave a firm nod. "We do this together," he murmured. Steeling herself, Raven took a deep breath, allowing the strength within her to rise. As the enemy forces surged forward, the battlefield erupted with raw energy. The twin airs unleashed their combined strength, fire and wind colliding in a violent tempest. Their power tore through the enemy lines like an unrelenting storm, the very ground quaking beneath them. Nature itself bent to their will, ensuring no adversary could stand against them. With a final, decisive surge, their magic exploded outward, a force of pure destruction that swept through the battlefield, leaving their enemies with no chance to escape. Lucian fought fiercely, his movements a blur of lethal precision. His claws tore through the enemy ranks with unrelenting force, his wolf howling in primal fury as he cut down any who dared come near Raven. His golden eyes burned with a dangerous glow, fueled by an instinctive need to protect his mate. Each strike was calculated, his strength unmatched as he fought with the deadly grace of a seasoned warrior. Even as blood splattered across his armor, he remained unshaken. His only focus was ensuring Raven remained untouched. His love for her was not just a bond, it was a force that drove him to fight harder, faster, deadlier, and nothing, not even an army, would keep him from her side. But as Raven took a deep breath surveying the battlefield, a sharp movement caught her eye. Celine, bloodied and desperate, surged forward with a dagger, aiming straight for Raven's heart. Before Raven could react, Lucian intercepted her, grabbing Celine by the throat and slamming her to the ground. "You never learn, do you?" he growled. Celine choked, her eyes blazing with hatred. "She doesn't deserve to rule. She was nothing, just a rogue." Lucian's grip tightened, his wolf barely restrained. "And yet she has everything you wanted." His voice was lethal. "This is where your story ends." With one swift motion, he snapped her neck, ending her reign of deceit once and for all, as the Southern Alphas who had betrayed the Lycan kingdom were rounded up. One of them attempted to flee. Darius, ever watchful, intercepted him with a deadly glare. "You can run, but there's nowhere left to hide." Lucian addressed the council, his voice firm and unyielding. A tense silence filled the hall, as the elders and high-ranking warriors exchanged uneasy glances. Some nodded in agreement, their loyalty unwavering, while others hesitated, clearly weighing the risks of open war. One elder, a seasoned strategist, leaned forward. "If Gregor has secured the support of the Southern Alphas, we must consider their resources. This isn't just a battle, it's a political power play." Another council member, his face lined with age, murmured, "And if we win, how do we prevent future betrayals? Stripping them of power is one thing, but ensuring long-term stability is another." Lucian's gaze sharpened, recognizing the hidden challenges beyond the battlefield. "This isn't just about war," he admitted. "It's about securing our future. We must ensure that those who turned against us can never rise again. Those who betrayed us will no longer hold power. Their lands and titles are forfeit, and they will answer for their treason." The room remained silent for a moment before a collective nod passed among the council. The decision had been made. The Lycan kingdom would not fall. With Gregor and Celine gone, and the Southern Alphas stripped of their ranks, Kieran fully stepped into his birthright, reclaiming his position as ruler of the Southern Lycan kingdom. As the dust of war settled, Raven stood atop the palace balcony, Lucian's arms wrapped around her waist. "It's over," she whispered. Lucian pressed a kiss to her temple. "And now, we build a future." She leaned into him, knowing that together they would face whatever came next. That night, as the kingdom celebrated, Lucian took Raven by the hand and led her away from the noise. He brought her to a secluded terrace overlooking the vast lands that were now fully under their rule. The moon bathed them in silver light as he pulled her into his arms, brushing a soft kiss against her forehead. "You did it," he murmured, his voice full of admiration. "They will never question you again." Raven sighed, her fingers tracing the intricate embroidery of his tunic. "It still feels surreal. Just months ago, I was nothing more than a rogue with no future. Now I'm queen." Lucian cupped her face, his golden eyes full of devotion. Yet beneath that unwavering love, a flicker of doubt lingered in his chest. What if he wasn't enough? What if the weight of the kingdom, the battles ahead, and the ghosts of their past proved too much? He had fought countless enemies, but the thought of failing Raven, of not being the mate and king she deserved, terrified him more than any war ever could. But as he looked into her eyes, seeing nothing but trust and love, he let those fears melt away. With her, he would always find the strength to keep going. "You were never just a rogue, Raven. You were always meant for more. And no matter how much power you hold, I want you to know that you're never alone." She smiled, leaning into his touch. "I know, and I will never leave your side." Their lips met in a slow, deep kiss, sealing their vows not just as king and queen, but as mates destined to rule together. Because she was not just a rogue, she was the Lycan queen. That night, after the battle had been won and the kingdom had begun its path to recovery, Kieran found Ella wandering through the palace gardens. The air was cool, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth and blooming jasmine. He watched her from a distance, his wolf restless yet patient. "You're avoiding me again," Kieran finally said, stepping closer. Ella turned, her expression unreadable. "I just needed some air." He exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. "And I need you." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Ella swallowed, conflicted. She had spent so long resisting fate, but standing here, beneath the moonlight, she could no longer deny what her heart already knew. Kieran reached out, brushing a strand of red hair from her face. "We've been through too much to keep fighting this, Ella." She took a shaky breath. "I don't want to lose myself." "You won't," he promised, his voice steady. "You'll find yourself with me." Slowly, Ella placed her hands on his chest, feeling the warmth of his skin through his tunic. Kieran cupped her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. She closed her eyes, finally surrendering to the pull of the mate bond. Their lips met in a slow, consuming kiss, one of acceptance, of surrender, of love. The bond between them flared to life, sealing their fates as mates. A soft glow enveloped them, their wolves howling in unison within their souls, recognizing what had always been meant to be. When they pulled apart, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "Mine," he murmured. Ella smiled, her resistance melting away. "Yours." As time passed, the kingdom flourished under Raven and Lucian's rule. Trade routes reopened, fostering stronger alliances with neighboring packs, while the pack's defenses were reinforced to ensure lasting security. The once divided kingdom now stood united, its people no longer questioning their leaders, but embracing them with unwavering devotion. Under Raven's guidance, new policies encouraged growth and stability. The orphanage expanded, ensuring no child was left without a home, while warriors trained under refined strategies to prevent future uprisings. The packlands, once scarred by conflict, were now thriving, a testament to the strength and wisdom of their rulers. One evening, Lucian blindfolded Raven and led her through the palace corridors, his hands steady on her shoulders. "Lucian, what are you up to?" she asked, laughing softly. "You'll see," he said, amusement lacing his voice. He guided her outside, the cool night air brushing against her skin. When he finally removed the blindfold, Raven gasped. Before her lay the newly renovated palace garden, transformed into a breathtaking paradise. Stone pathways wound through vibrant flower beds, cascading fountains sparkled in the moonlight, and at the center stood a magnificent glass greenhouse, its structure glowing softly with lantern light. Lucian watched her reaction, his heart swelling with satisfaction. "You've done so much for the kingdom. I wanted to give you something just for you." Raven stepped forward, awestruck. She entered the greenhouse, inhaling the fragrant scent of tropical flowers and lush greenery. Exotic plants flourished inside, creating a hidden oasis of warmth and beauty. She turned to Lucian, emotion shining in her emerald eyes. "It's perfect. Thank you." He pulled her into his arms, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I want you to have a place where you can escape, where you can breathe." Raven hesitated for a moment before stepping back, her hands resting against his chest. She gazed up at him, her expression shifting to something tender, yet uncertain. "There's something I need to tell you," she said softly. Lucian frowned, his hands tightening around her waist. "What is it?" A smile broke across Raven's face as she placed a hand on her stomach. "We're going to have a pup." For a moment, Lucian simply stared, his breath caught in his throat. Then, realization dawned, and pure joy erupted in his golden eyes. He let out a breathless laugh, lifting Raven into his arms and spinning her around. "You're serious, E?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. She nodded, laughing as happy tears filled her eyes. "Yes." Lucian cupped her face, kissing her fiercely. "You've just given me the greatest gift." Raven rested her forehead against his, her heart bursting with love. "And you've given me everything I never knew I needed." They stood there beneath the glowing lanterns, wrapped in each other's embrace. knowing that their love had not only survived battles and betrayals, but had flourished into something even greater, a family. Lucian pressed a gentle kiss to Raven's forehead, his arms tightening around her. "This is just the beginning," he murmured. Raven smiled, resting her head against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. "Whatever comes next, we face it together," she whispered. And in that moment, under the silver glow of the moon, they knew their love would endure anything the future held. Because she was not just a rogue, she was the Lycan Queen.